So the easiest answer to why biodiversity matters is that we humans are in fact animals, and everything that we rely upon to sustain us, we find from this biosphere. And everything that is sustaining us from every aspect of our lives, I focus on food, but every aspect of our lives we get from this planet. And so the simplest, most easy answer to why biodiversity matters is that without a really biodiverse planet that can provide enough ecosystem services, humans will live in utter misery, and the quality of your children's life and your grandchildren's life will continually become worse. So we most certainly cannot sustain billions of people on a non-bio. It's just as simple as that. And then the second question was.
And real quick, so
what was your second question, Nikki?
Well, yeah, so real quick, I would say, so it seems almost like as the population goes up, biodiversity is going down, because I guess I should ask another question, because an average person might not necessarily know. Why is biodiversity declining? What are some of the top activities that we are engaged in that cause the decline in biodiversity?
For animals, the primary decline of biodiversity is unregulated and unchecked hunting. By far, that is the main reason that wild animal populations are going down. For plant biodiversity, one of the main reasons it's going down is just because of the way we have designed this human-centric landscape. So we did not understand, and we still don't understand that much about biodiversity when we think about how we design the world we live in. And so we have designed materials for cities, for parks, for homes, for every way in which we interface with our environment. We have designed the least biodiverse landscape we could possibly come up with. And this goes back to ideas of us conquering nature, to ideas about what is neat and tidy and hygienic. And so we essentially have made this world in which our design is the antithesis of a biodiverse landscape.
Very interesting, very interesting. So then the second question was how bees come into play with biodiversity.
So first of all, I recently made a talk about this for a place, and I have tons of new, good, like small facts that I'll send to you in a PowerPoint.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. But bees come into this because of what a keystone species they are in terms of ecosystem services through pollination. So we know, right, that about a third of our crops are completely dependent upon honeybees. So the food that we eat would be reduced by about 30%. And we know that what would be left would be of lesser nutritional value and quality. But aside from just products that rely on honey pollination, 90% of wild forest ecosystem services rely on pollination. So your wild trees and your wild plants, if you look at like a forest ecosystem as a whole, it's about 90% dependent upon pollinators. So they're a really basic primary deliverer of a stable environment in the plant world. We gotta have bees.
So it's almost,
and this extends up the food system.
It's almost like it makes me think of a bodily organ like a spleen or a liver or something you don't see it and you don't really think about it, but it's there and it plays a big role. And so when we think about like wild plant life and forest and things like that, most of us live lives where we don't see these things. So we don't really
Right.
think about, and especially when we think about the fact that some of those ecosystem systems are in countries and areas far away from us, right? Like the Amazon rainforest seems like this big problem for someone else, but it impacts everyone on the planet, right? It's like the liver. If you were just to keep ignoring your liver and burning your liver, you would feel it in your head, because that's how interconnected our body is, right? Like you'd probably get headaches, right? So, so that's
Yeah. The thing is that for most people who don't work in a job like beekeeping in the United States, you don't see how radically the landscape is changing outside towns and cities, because you just simply don't spend that much time out there. So for example, we see it all the time because of where we work, but in the Midwestern United States, from like 2009 to 2015, there were something around the order of 9 million acres of native habitat lost and completely turned into corn. So the landscape is being completely transformed, and it's going in the opposite direction of diversity. But for most of us who don't work in that sector, we have no idea. It's like a shock. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what is it that is endangering the bee population, or the effectiveness, efficiency, or efficacy of the remaining bee population?
A really big part of it is what I just said, is the habitat and lack of diversity in the landscape, because bees need a diverse pollen, need diverse pollen sources. And so if they just have one source of pollen, or if pollen of nutritional quality goes away, that's a huge issue for us right now. And another thing is a parasitic mite called the Varroa mite that made the jump from an Asian honeybee species, and I think was transported to the US from Korea in 1987. So that's really significantly weakened our honeybees. Pesticides in the United States and globally are a huge issue. Pesticides. So you have this kind of perfect storm. Also, beekeepers, in order to meet pollination demands, have to truck their bees all over the United States. And this is a huge stressor for honeybees. And so you kind of have this perfect storm of bees that are weakened already, and then they're being moved around, and then they're not getting proper nutrition where they go. And it leads to these big collapses that you read about sometimes in the paper. And
Interesting.
so, to bridge to your third question, what people can do: design your personal space to be pollinator friendly. That is the first, most easy thing that you can do. There's a ton of resources about it, which I'm sure you'll share with people through your newsletter or your website. But there is so much information specific to where you are in the United States. And there are so many things you can do, regardless of if you live in a balcony, apartment in Manhattan, or if you live on a 500-acre ranch. Morgan Freeman, you could look this up, turned his entire 500 acres into a pollinator paradise.
Wow. Wow.
Yep.
Interesting. So when I think of pollinators, I tend to think of flowers, right? So I recently rearranged my office and I'm in a different room, and I can now look out the window and I have flowers right outside my window, and I occasionally see a butterfly or a hummingbird or a bee. So when we're talking about pollinators, those are all pollinators. So I think about flowers, but give me a few examples of other things people might consider when they're thinking about being pollinator friendly.
Yeah, so obviously, if you think about monarchs right now are really, really in peril. And places like Iowa, places throughout the Midwest corridor from Canada to Mexico, if we don't want to lose our monarch population, it is absolutely essential that the people in the Midwestern United States down through Texas plant milk veg.
Okay.
And that is what the monarch butterflies need to land on. They need that when they're reproducing. They have to have it. It's their core habitat and they can't change. And recently, a lot of that milk vetch has been going away. And so that is one really critical thing that everybody could be a part of. And if you could get your community, you can plant it and it grows really easily. You can plant it on roadside ditches. If you're a farmer, you can plant it around the edges of your field. If you live in the suburbs, great. You can plant your whole yard out. That's a really important one. If you want a comprehensive list, the US is so big, it's hard to make a generic recommendation about what plants. The Xerxes Foundation website, they break down sections of the country based on your climate zone, and they will list exactly the plants that you need to plant for your region.
That's super helpful. And now in terms of so I would envision that this could be really helpful if somebody's working at a hotel or some kind of place where there's any amount of landscaping, even if it's a small amount of landscaping, that maybe they can add into the proposal, the RFP with their landscaping service. They ask their landscaping service to present what their practices are that are bee friendly. What plants do they add or that are pollinator friendly? What plants do they plant? What pesticides and other things? What do they do that? And I think it just puts the vendor on notice, right? It puts the landscaper on notice that this is important to a company and that they have to have practices that support that.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely something you should request for if you're a homeowner, because a lot of landscape companies also do not like using all the sprays and pesticides on the lawn because it hurts them and their employees as well. But it's what they think their customers are demanding. And so there are so many pollinator groups that you can become a part of that can give you literally just precision information about how to turn your lawn into a pollinator lawn. And you can just sit down with your landscaper, show him the materials, and just say, this is what I need you to do to help me. How can we shift away from the agrochemical lawn that I have now into this pollinator friendly lawn? And I know some landscapers that are already offering services like this in the Minnesota Twin Cities area. But I think a lot of landscapers would be really happy to comply with this type of request from a customer. There are truly opportunities at every scale here. There's an initiative called Bee City USA that targets mayors and city council people to teach you how to turn an entire city into a bee-friendly region. There's Bee Campus USA for college campuses to teach people how to turn college campuses into a pollinator paradise. There are groups that do it at the city level. A great example is Petersburg Pollinators in Ontario. They turned an entire city into like a flowering paradise. But they have it all the way down to the individual level, like what do you put on your balcony in pots if you have no space? So you really don't have to go it alone. It can really be fun. It's not hard. And the reason it's not hard is that the information is all there for you. They'll help you do it. Every state has an apiary inspector. You could always ask the apiary inspector, say, hey, I'm interested in getting involved in habitat. I want to know where to start. Beekeeping clubs and resources are available. Google Master Beekeeping Club. There are local beekeeping clubs throughout the country.
From the perspective of food purchases and just like if I'm in a restaurant, in a hotel, or even in my home, and I want to make certain food choices, are there certain buying habits that I can engage in that better support? Because we know that money is the power, right? We know that really money is what's going to move a lot of companies in the direction of doing the things they need to do to protect biodiversity. So what can I do as a consumer with my spending dollar to send the message that biodiversity is important?
The very most important thing you could do would be to support local organic farmers. And I say that because beekeepers are all looking for local organic farmers to put their bees on their land.
Okay.
And this is really different from like an enormous company that's doing organic, because even though they're doing organic, some of their practices are still somewhat harmful for bees. But what beekeepers need more than anything are more farmers to become organic farmers. And they need to put their bees on the land of organic farmers. And so if you can directly support local organic practices or agroforestry practices, or like grazing, like open pasture land grazing for beef is really, really good for beekeepers because of the alfalfa. So that's what you really, really should do, is support your local people in your area that are doing it right, because you can be sure that beekeepers are putting bees on their land.
I think that's great, because I think sometimes there's a little bit of an argument about organic being, you know, people like to argue, is organic really better for us? It's all about us, right? But I think this is really interesting, because it's like, well, organic is not only better for us, it's better for the whole ecosystem we rely on. So I think that's really very interesting.
There are now places in the Midwest where, other than organic farmers, there is literally nowhere you can put your bees where they won't die or become sprayed with pesticide. And so you don't want to just think about organic farming as, what does it do for me? You want to think about, how does this farmer manage the land? And so if it's a great big monoculture organic farm, maybe that's really not what we're looking for either. Support your small producers who are managing their land the right way. And that is a huge way to support beekeepers. Do not let those producers go out of business, because we need them as much as they need us.
And what about climate change and climate issues? What's the direct link? Because I know that part of the mission of your organization is environmental. So how is beekeeping an environmental or climate related action?
So the way that it is for us is that beekeepers tend to be environmental stewards. And that's because the product that they're producing requires a healthy natural environment. So if the environment is toxic and polluted, their bees die. If the environment can't support plant biodiversity, they can't produce very good quality honey and sell it at a good price. And so for us, a lot of our beekeepers used to cut trees, and now they've become beekeepers. And so we actually see a conversion from poaching or deforestation to beekeeping.